I didn't know you were on a Dr. Phil show as a pastor, as the consulting
Long,
pastor, as a
long time
patient.
ago.
Not as a patient.
They called me an expert. Like whenever he had some crazy whack job Christian on there, he brought me on to kind of say, no, that's not what Christianity teaches. That's not what Christianity believes. Here's what the Bible actually says. So he brought me on a number of. It was always hard. It was the worst episodes you can imagine being on too.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Giulio Show. Today I have an amazing guest. We were actually going to go another way. We were going to talk about taking action on your plans that we were working off when we were talking about stop procrastinating, finish what you start. The next step was going to be taking action. But I got on the phone with a great friend of mine who I actually met in Panama and Costa Rica. His name is Jayne. He is a pastor in northern San Diego. But I'm going to introduce him. Before I do, this man has so many, how would you say that? He gives you those aha moments because he is so well versed in the Bible. He's a pastor. He actually blew my mind so many times on that trip when I thought I even knew the Christmas story. He set me straight on that one. I was like, oh my
Yeah.
God, what was I thinking? I mean, it's kind of similar, but he just keeps blowing my mind. And I want to introduce you before I'll tell you why I asked him to come on, because this is gonna blow your mind. His name is Jayne. He is a pastor, and he's been a senior pastor at the Coastline Church in California since 2010. Now I'm reading some of this because I really need to give him his props. He is just an amazing person. And during the time at that church, he's grown it from under 100 attendees to over 1,000 weekly. Now, how do you do something like that? You have to have a great passion, a great love. He did that by creating a life-giving culture where people begin their journey of knowing God, living in freedom, and discovering their purpose and being empowered to make a difference for the kingdom. Is part of a founding team of the Los Angeles Dream Center with Pastor Tom and Matthew Barnett. A great organization. We should talk about that a little bit too. He has spoken in churches and conferences throughout Europe, Australia, Africa, Asia, North and South America, and many, many places more that we'll talk about. He has written articles for different newspapers, magazines, and was featured in books of Josh McDowell's book, Youth Ministry, as well as Matthew Barnett and George Barna's book, The Cause Within You. He's been a regular on Dr. Phil, not as a patient, but as an expert on Christianity. So when Dr. Phil would get some of these, how do you say, off the wall theories,
Whack job.
Whack jobs. He would bring in Pastor Aaron, which is crazy, which is wonderful. I love that about you. Aaron is married, has a wonderful wife called Amanda. He has two lovely boys, and again, they're from the North County, San Diego Coastline, where the church is located, where Coastline Church is located. Sorry, Aaron, welcome to the show.
It is so good to be here, man. I love you. I fell in love with you when we traveled all over Panama and Costa Rica, and your heart is absolutely incredible. And anything I can ever do for you, I am here to serve.
And you have, because I've asked you to be my mentor from the moment I met you after you blew my mind a few times. Let's go, just real quickly before we give the shocking news of what you're going to talk about today, because I love you too. And I mean, there's sometimes where you just meet people and you don't know where you became friends, how you became friends, but you just connected like you were brothers or family forever. And that's how I felt when I met Aaron and his two great friends, Stephen and Mark, right? Because I'm good at not remembering names. So this is perfect.
I'm better than you at not remembering names, and I have a job where I'm supposed to remember names.
I know, especially Jesus.
But way too many drugs when I was young. That's the problem. Way too many drugs. I killed way too many brain cells.
I think we talked about that, you and me, brother. I think we did enough for the country. That's not who we are today, thank God. But
No.
God did give us a great lesson in that one. But you said to me about the Christmas story, because we all think of this. Just really quickly, I got to touch on this. Is we all think of that night, Joseph and Mary going through this treacherous terrain and then giving birth in some barn.
Yeah.
With a cow standing over there going, "Got milk?" So, you just sat there and you really brought that to life. Real quick, just to recap on that.
Yeah.
What is, set us straight on that Christmas story, because I think people really need to know that.
Well, the problem why we have a Christmas story that's so far from accurate is because we don't actually read the text. We don't read the Bible. So the Christmas story that we celebrate today in America is not actually in the Bible. We have this idea that Mary and Joseph come rolling into Bethlehem in the middle of the night. She's going into labor. I mean, what an irresponsible husband. I mean, it's just terrible, right? And we don't understand Middle Eastern culture. We don't actually read the text. All the Bible tells us, if you actually read the text, is while they were in Bethlehem, the time had come for the baby to be born. That's all it says. So if you actually look at the story in context, they were in Bethlehem for a few months before the delivery of the baby. They were there for a period of time. And we know this because the Bible says they placed the baby in a manger and there was no room for them in the upper room, in the guest room. And the reason why there was no room is it was a very small room for a bride and groom. Very likely it was Joseph's father's house that they were living in. There's no room in the upper room because in the first century, the most dangerous time for a woman is childbirth. Women die during childbirth because of all the complications. So you need midwives, you need nurses, you need family, friends supporting. There's not enough room in their bridal chamber, this little bedroom that Mary and Joseph lived in. So they moved in the living room. The reason we know it's the living room is because they put him in a manger. And if you look at first century architecture in Israel, mangers were kept in the living room in poor families because you brought your animals in at night. You didn't want your milk goat, the most valuable possession you have, to be stolen. Just like we have garages in America and you park your nice car in the garage so that it's not vandalized or stolen in the middle of the night. They brought their milk cow in the middle of the night, put mangers in the living room. So if he got hungry, he didn't wake up the rest of the family. And it's all right there in the text. We don't read it. And so what we have is a story of Christmas that comes from the proto-evangelism of James, which was written around AD 200 or 300, which is one of the Gnostic Gospels not accepted by the early fathers because it wasn't authenticated as being historically accurate. And yet we kept this tradition on for years. And so you've got these plays where there's this innkeeper says there's no room in the inn. Well, the truth is,
didn't have Hampton Inn or
no, there is no hotel in the Christmas story. Read all four Gospels. Everything you can find about Christmas, there is no hotel in the Christmas story. If you look at the Greek language, the word that Luke uses, there's no room. It's the word for an upper room or a guest room on a house. Luke knows the Greek word for hotel because in Luke chapter 10, the story of the Good Samaritan, he uses a far different Greek word for the Good Samaritan that brings the guy to the hotel. That's a different Greek word than the Christmas story. The Christmas story is the same word that Jesus uses at the end when he tells the disciples, go get the upper room ready to have the Lord's Supper. It's just an attached room onto a main house. And so Mary and Joseph didn't have the most dramatic childbirth the way we like to celebrate. But here's what that tells us. We think that God can only show up in the dramatic moments of our life. The reality is Jesus can show up in the very routine, the very mundane, the very normal and ordinary moments of your life, as well as the dramatic moments. And the Christmas story was not as dramatic as we want it to be. It was very ordinary. It was a Middle Eastern family giving birth in the living room of their home with a lot of family present, putting Jesus in a manger. He wasn't the first baby in a manger. Everybody kept their babies in mangers because they made a perfect crib.
So Joseph was actually from Jerusalem, correct?
Bethlehem. Because in the first century, you pay taxes where you live. So Mary lived in Nazareth. Joseph lived in Bethlehem. His family was in Bethlehem. His home was in Bethlehem. And think about Middle Eastern culture. Like you're
So
Italian.
it wasn't like he was knocking on every door. He already had a home there that his family lived.
Well,
Is that what you
look what Luke says. You're Italian, you'll understand this. Luke
said?
says Joseph is of the house of David. Joseph is royalty. He's of the house of David. He's in Bethlehem, the city of David. Would any Middle Eastern family in the first century turn away a pregnant woman that is royalty out of their home? No. They would throw their kids out on the street before they turned away a pregnant woman. The hospitality culture in the Middle Eastern was so incredible that there's no way they would have ever been turned away as royalty in his hometown. So
I think that was the culture back then, and I wish it was still now. People opened up their houses for people in need, but like you
100%.
said, yeah.
But he already lived there, so he didn't need it.
Was from Bethlehem or not, they would have opened that house a long time for her.
What most scholars, archaeologists, and historians believe is they were in Bethlehem 3 to 6 months before the baby was born. And the reason is you do not travel with a pregnant woman that distance and that period of time in the third trimester. It's too painful and too difficult.
Now, is it painful on the man, or you meant the terrain?
I mean, it's just, I mean, can you imagine your third trimester?
Be bitten the whole way through,
yeah,
right?
Imagine your third trimester of pregnancy traveling across that type of terrain. It wouldn't have happened. And plus, they needed to get Mary out of Nazareth because she's pregnant. She's not married. There's a lot of scandal. There's a lot of shame. So they moved to a different town. And if you look at the Greek language, the nuance of the Greek language, the wedding ceremony happens before the birth of Jesus. They're legally married before the birth of Jesus. If you read Luke's gospel in the original Greek language, you see it in there.
Were they married in Nazareth, or were they married in Bethlehem?
It seems to indicate they were married in Bethlehem, at Joseph's family's property, family's home, and that's where Joseph's family was, and that's typically where the marriage would have taken place.
Well, I mean, just to really, we can probably go on for hours on this story, right? Yeah. And we will come back to it some other time, because you did send me pictures of what what do you call it? A manger, or where this would have taken place because of what they've recovered.
Yeah, we have archaeological finds of first century homes around Jerusalem, and you see mangers in the living room in the home. See, a wealthy person would have had a stable or a barn for their animals, and a wealthy person would have had cribs made for children. Jesus was put in a manger, which tells us Jesus was not born into a wealthy family. He was born into a poor family. And the shepherds, who are the lowest caste of society, the angels say, you'll find him, lying in a manger. Well, the shepherds had believed for a Messiah figure to come for hundreds of thousands of years because of the Old Testament prophecy. Now, in a shepherd's mind, the Messiah is going to be born to a governor, a king. He's going to be born into royalty. He's going to be born into a noble, important family. There's no way a shepherd, being the lowest caste of society, would ever be invited into a home like that. So the angel points out a detail to the shepherds to help the shepherds understand, no, you will be welcome to go visit the baby, because he's born in a home just like your home. He's born to a poor family, not a wealthy family. That's why the angel said, you'll find him lying in a manger. It's a very important detail of what the angels did there to basically tell the shepherds, you will be welcome.
Wow. It does. It gets fascinating. And if by chance, if you get to, will you send me a picture of that
Absolutely.
I can't even say it, archaeological
find, whatever you want to call it. I will definitely.
Because I want to post it on this podcast too, so people can, once you get a visual of that, you'll understand exactly what Pastor Aaron is talking about. But I want to move ahead a little bit more, because again, we can go on. You're such a wealth of knowledge, and you really you're teaching me to really, when I read the Bible, to break it down to the words, what it actually says. But you said something interesting to me the other day, and that was all sinners are going to heaven and all good people are not. And I don't know what you meant by that statement, but you blew my mind. And I told you to
But
hold every thought, and maybe I heard you wrong, but say it again.
well, that's a little different than how I communicated. We have this idea in America today that good people go to heaven. If you ask the average American, the majority of Americans believe that good people go to heaven. That's just, oh, they were a good person, they definitely went to heaven. They were good, they definitely went to heaven. That is a myth. It's a lie. Now, the reason we like to believe this thought that good people go to heaven is because it makes sense, and we believe that we make the cut because we believe we're good people. We believe we're good people, especially compared to those people, right? We all have somebody in our life we know we're better than. And so we just automatically assume we're good people. The problem is there's no definition for what good is. In history, in culture, in religion, like, think about it. What we believe was good and bad 1,000 years ago is very different than today. Culturally, what we believe is good and bad is different. There are cultures in the world who believe there are things that are good and they're actually doing the will of God that we believe as Americans are absolutely evil and horrible. So there's no
I believe
standard.
a lot of things have gone really bad lately.
Yeah. Well, there is no unified standard anywhere to discover what is good. Like what is good? So if it's good enough to go to heaven, what does that mean? Is that like baseball, where if I can bat 300, which is actually 30%, I'm good enough to go to heaven? Is it a majority? Do I have to hit 51%? Is it like school, where I have to hit 70%? Do my thoughts count, or is it just my actions and deeds? There's no logical reasoning for what is good enough to go to heaven. Now, what some people will do is say, well, the Bible tells us what is good and what is evil, what is right, and what is wrong. As a pastor, let me tell you, if you want to use the Bible to figure out what is good enough to go to heaven, that's a terrible idea. Because if you use the Bible to figure out what is good enough to go to heaven, what you're going to discover right away is you're not good enough. You don't make the cut. You see, Jesus, he comes along in the New Testament, and this is mind-blowing. Jesus comes in the New Testament because there's all these people following the Old Testament law, thinking that they're good enough because they're not breaking any commands. Jesus raised the standard so high that the very best people in the world were no longer good enough.
So let's get this straight. He didn't change the commandments.
He made them harder. Yeah, because what Jesus said is like, look, you've heard it said, don't commit a murder. I'm telling you right now, if you've even had the thought of anger towards a person in your mind, you've committed that sin. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. I'm telling you, if you even look at a woman lustfully, you have committed that sin. Jesus raised the standard.
Oh my God, I've committed.
So now that the best people in the world are no longer good enough. So here's what Jesus taught. Jesus did not teach us that good people go to heaven. Jesus did not teach that. Jesus taught us that there are bad people who will make it into heaven, and there are good people who are not good enough to get into heaven. That's what Jesus taught. There's a thief on the cross, right? This guy doesn't have time to get water baptized, doesn't have time to do anything good to pay for all the bad things he's done. And Jesus looks at this guy and says, today you will be with me in paradise. This is a bad dude. He's a criminal. He's on a cross for committing crimes. He has no opportunity to turn his life around. He's about to die. And Jesus says, today you'll be with me in paradise. So here's what Jesus taught. Jesus did not teach good people go to heaven. Jesus taught forgiven people go to heaven. Because none of us will ever be good enough. There was only one good person, and that was Jesus. I
always tell people it's the man on the middle cross told us we can.
Yeah.
Come to his home. Yeah, it's pretty much that. But that's kind of, it gets confusing because I'm still scratching my head here a little bit. Because last night, for instance, I just happened to turn on the news just to quickly see what's going on. And you see all these people crying death to Jews and, out on Columbia University, and the police are moving in, and there's people swearing, putting their fingers up, saying that the stuff that they're yelling is just, it's worse than murder. Like you said, just even saying the words in Jesus's eyes is you have committed that murder already, and they're speaking of committing more genocide. How do these people, are they going to get to heaven, or what? This is where my confusion is how does this all work? Because they think they believe in God too, maybe not Jesus. I don't know what they believe in, but they're thinking their God is going to raise them up. We're thinking our God is going to raise us up, and these people should be eliminated, not these
Yeah.
people, not. But you're saying our God is going to invite, our Jesus is going to invite everybody. Help me understand
Everybody that receives the gift, the free gift of grace, will make it to heaven. Jesus was talking to Nicodemus in John chapter 3. Nicodemus was a good-hearted Jewish man who loved God with all of his heart, tried to serve God with all of his heart, and was really doing his best. And he was a very, very good man.
Was he a Pharisee?
He was, but he was a good Pharisee. Pharisees
Okay.
weren't all evil. Most of the Pharisees were very good people who loved God, who wanted to follow God, and who were doing their best to serve God. And that was Nicodemus. And Nicodemus comes to Jesus, and he asks the question in John chapter 3, how do I get to heaven? How do I be made right with God? And Jesus doesn't say, you've got to behave again. Like, it's all about your behavior. It's all about you following the rules and following the law and doing all the... No, he said, you got to be born again. You've got to be born again. You see, when we're born into a family, it has nothing to do with our behavior. When my son was born, I didn't put him on probation for 5 years before I gave him our last name. I didn't say, look, I need to know how this works out. I got to make sure you don't end up in jail. You don't end up on drugs. You make it through college. Before you get our last name, the Jayne family name, I need to know that you deserve it. I need to know that you've earned it, that you're worth it. No, he got my last name the day he was born. And can I be very honest? When my son was born, his behavior, like, he was the most selfish human being I have ever met when he was born. Like, all he thought about was himself. He would just cry, and he wanted to be held, and he wanted his diaper changed, and he wanted to be fed. Do you realize when my son was born, he never asked me one time how my day was? He never asked to help around the house. No, his behavior was terrible. Like, he was the most selfish human being. It was all about him when he was born, and yet we loved him. And we gave him our last name, and he was part of our family. It had nothing to do with his behavior. It had everything to do with who his father was. You see, what a Christian is not somebody who does good. A Christian is not somebody who behaves. A Christian is not somebody who follows the rule. A Christian is somebody who is born by grace into the family of God, something we do not deserve. Now, I do my best to follow God and love people and help people, not to be a Christian, but because I'm already a Christian. Because what Jesus taught over and over again, because here's what religion, Jesus was always against religion, always against religion. Jesus, let me put it like this. Does it irritate you in America today that so-called quote unquote Christians who claim to be right about God and claim to be right with God mistreat and devalue people?
Oh my goodness. You see it happen all the time. I mean, now that they've become a Christian, you're evil, you're the devil, and you don't come near me.
And Jesus...
And don't come to my church.
That irritated Jesus. He was furious by it. Jesus' whole ministry is like, you cannot claim to be right with God and mistreat and devalue people the Father loves. And God loves everyone. God loves every person in the world. And Jesus over and over and over said, you cannot be right with my Father and mistreat people my Father loves. Because my Father loves people.
Okay, so what you're basically saying, let me see if I'm understanding this, is it's not about, I mean, it helps to do good deeds. It helps to help other people. It helps to, follow the commandments. I mean, let's give that, we're not saying that you got to be a sinner and then at the last minute you're in if you say please. I mean, there's got to be some good, but we're all sinners. But
well, the question that Jesus asks that we all have to answer is, have you ever mistreated another person?
Well, we all have, I think.
100%.
I don't think there's not one person 100%. That hasn't mistreated, even in the thought.
So according to Jesus, we're all sinners. And we all fall short of the glory of God. And none of us will ever, in our entire life, be good enough for God. None of us will ever be good enough for God. So how do we
So that's what you mean about even people of sin will get into heaven, because no one will ever be without sin. That's what you're really saying. You're not saying
Yeah,
that if you're going
none
out
of us are
there
perfect.
and just, yeah, and you're intentionally, hurting people and really committing some bad stuff, it's not like the door is going to be wide open for you. You have to, uh, how do you say, give yourself to God, believe in the one Father, believe in His Son. Um,
But here's where the confusion comes. You don't clean yourself up to come to God. You
Explain.
come to God broken, dirty, filthy, and you let God clean you up. A lot of people think, well, I can't go to God. I need to clean up my act. I need to
Before
get.
or after? You're talking why we're
I'm
still
talking about
here?
before. I'm talking about
So why
before.
we're still here on earth?
No, I'm talking about before the moment we give our life to Christ. Before the
Okay.
moment on earth we give our life to Christ, give our life to God. A lot of people think, well, I can't go to church. I got to clean myself up, or I can't come to God right now. I need to clean up my act. I need to clean up my behavior. I'm doing too many bad things for God to accept me. Not realizing it's God that cleans you up, not you. Like I don't take a shower before I take a bath. It's like at the end of the day, we come to God broken as sinners in whatever condition, and God accepts us as we are. God does not demand you to do anything to come to Him other than say yes, other than come to Him. You look at the story of the prodigal son who goes away from God or goes away from the father, and he abuses the father, takes the father's stuff, wastes it all, and he's coming back to the father, and he's rehearsing this speech. Dad, just let me be a servant in your house. I'm not worthy to be called your son anymore. I don't deserve to be a son. I don't deserve to be part of the family. Just let me be a servant in the home. And he's rehearsing this speech. He gets to the father, and what does the father do? Like, he starts going into the speech, and the father interrupts, and he says, stop. You're my son. Bring the robe. Bring the ring. Bring the shoes. I don't want anyone in this entire town to look at you as anything other than my son. Period. I don't care what you've done. I don't care where you've been. You are my son. And that's the heart of God. We don't
Well,
clean
it's
ourselves
funny
up to come to God.
because I've had this debate with a couple people, not a debate, but discussion, where they were like, wait a minute, that is so unfair, because they didn't get it. The metaphor to it as well is like, you can come to God as long as you come back home. It doesn't matter when. But they were like, but that's unfair, because his other son served him every day, every year of his life. He did everything for his father, while the other son went out and blew all the money, did all the partying, you know, probably been with every woman in the village, and
Yep.
committed sin left and right. And yet this child, who was faithful to his father,
Yep.
turned around and forgave the son who totally ruined and did everything of the opposite, and said, don't worry, you serve him. He told his other son, who was good,
Yep.
you serve him
Well,
and get him
the
cleaned up. So
the key to the story is who is the crowd that he was speaking. See, the story of the prodigal is not about the younger brother.
right.
The whole story is about the older brother.
But you see where people get a
The
little upset,
younger
because they're
brother
like,
is
this
the
this
supporting
kid,
it. Yeah,
he's done so well to his father, yet this one comes along.
he
It's like
hasn't
the
done
last
well.
comes first, right?
He hasn't done well, though. That's the thing. Both sons are lost.
Uh,
One's
explain.
lost in all of his bad deeds. One's lost in all of his good deeds. They're
Explain
both
that one.
lost. One's lost in the bad things he's doing. One's lost in he was doing good to manipulate the father. He wasn't doing good because he loved the father. He was doing good to manipulate the father. Many people who do good things are doing it with the wrong motives. Jesus was talking to Pharisees and religious people who were doing all the right things for the wrong reasons. They were doing good things to manipulate God. So the story is about the older brother. Now, in true Jewish culture, a good older brother would have gone to the father and said, Dad, I'll go find my younger brother. And whatever it costs me, whatever it takes, I will find my younger brother and I will bring him home, because I know how much you love him and I know how much your heart is hurting. And so I will go find my younger brother and I'll bring my brother home, and I'll bring him back to you. And it doesn't matter what it costs me. Now, in the story, Jesus paints a picture of an ugly older brother.
I get it.
An ugly older brother who did not. And the reason
he probably was praying that his brother wouldn't come home, because then he would be left everything. So for selfish reasons, he didn't go look for him so he would inherit everything.
But in contrast, I want you to think about, he already had everything, by the way. The father already divided the property, so the older brother owned everything. He already owned everything. Jesus did that in contrast. Why? Because, Giulio, you and I, we have an older brother that went to the father and he said, Dad, whatever I have to do, whatever it costs me, if I have to hang on a cross and if I have to shed my blood, I will go and I will bring my little brothers and my little sisters home to you. You see, we have the older brother, the good older brother. It makes me cry thinking about it, because we have the good older brother.
You have a great older brother.
That came to earth, that paid the ultimate price so that you and I could be brought home, so that we could have access to the Father, so that we could come to the Father. He paid for all of our sin, because I'm not good enough. So I needed somebody to save me, because I could not save myself. I could not do enough good deeds to save me. I needed somebody to save me, and that's what Jesus does. He comes to earth, takes all, and it's not fair. Our God is not fair. And I thank God he's not fair. Because if God was fair, if God gave me what I deserved, I'd be in hell forever. If I got what I deserve for my life, if I got what I deserve for all the things I've done, I thank God he's not fair. I thank God he doesn't treat me the way I deserve.
I think you and I would be sharing a room down there.
Exactly. But he's not fair. He's not fair. He doesn't give us what we deserve. He gives us grace. Grace is God giving you what you do not deserve. Mercy is not giving you what you do deserve. I deserve punishment for my life. God gave me mercy, and instead of punishing me, he punished Jesus. Jesus took all the punishment for me on the cross. I don't deserve any good thing in my life for the life that I've lived, yet God gives me grace, and he treats me and gives me what Jesus deserves. That's grace. Grace is when you get what you don't deserve. Mercy is when you don't get what you do deserve. God gives us grace and mercy, because here's the gospel message. If you ever want to know what the gospel message is, God treated Jesus. Think about this. God treated Jesus the way you and I deserve to be treated, so that God can treat us the way Jesus deserves to be treated. So the point is, good people don't go to heaven because there was only one good person, and his name was Jesus. Forgiven people go to heaven. People that have come to Jesus and said, forgive me. Forgive me.
The key word, forgiven people.
And when I become forgiven, all of a sudden God grades me with Jesus's life. So Jesus's life was perfect. All of a sudden that perfect grade is put on top of me. God doesn't look at me for my actions. God looks at me according to Jesus's actions. That's what being a Christian is. A Christian is not somebody who does the right things. A Christian is somebody who believes the right things. There's a radical difference.
Well, you know, he did, knowing that he was going to be crucified, because it was written, it was done, that he had to, he could have hid and not come back to meet the crucifixion and die for our sins. But he knew that was going to happen, correct? So he came back. Am I right, or am I reading this wrong?
No, he came because he knew we could not pay for our own sin. And he knew that the wages of sin is death. Romans tells us the wages of sin is death. Every sin I've ever committed deserves death, deserves punishment, deserves hell. God loved us so much, he could not bear the thought of us paying for our own sins, because he did not want to be separated from us. So what God did is he sent his son to be our sacrifice, to take all the punishment and payment for our sin. So imagine you owe $1,000 to the bank. Like you owe $1,000.
I do.
And God shows up, or you have a friend that shows up and goes to the bank and says, how much does Giulio owe you? And they say, well, he owes us $1,000. And he says, here's $1 million check. I want to pay for his debt. Well, that's too much, right? But that's what Jesus was. He was an overpayment for your life. It's like you owed $1,000 and God paid the bank $1 million. And now the bank loves you because they were paid so much more than what you owed. And that's what Jesus was.
I wish he was still around so he could pay some of those debts I have. But here's the other thing, and I'm going to kind of go a little bit further here, because I just heard this the other day as we're talking about Jesus and giving himself and sacrificing himself for us. And it was written that it had to be this way. And it was written that Judah would be the one to do it. And yet now they're saying he should be named a saint because he did what needed to happen. He did what needed to be done in order for this crucifixion to happen. So he should be called a saint. Help me out here.
I don't know if I would go down that road, honestly. What I believe is God's will is always going to be done. And at the exact same time, we have free choice. God will not override our will. We have free choice. God will get his will done. Now, his preference is to use us. Right. But if we say no, he's going to find somebody to get his will done. So we do have free will and we have free choice, and God will get his will done somehow. And so that's what I personally believe. So I believe Judah had free choice and free will. I don't believe God made him do it. I believe God used that circumstance to bring Jesus to the cross. But if it wasn't Judah, it would have been, somehow Jesus would have ended up on a cross because that was God's will.
So the debate is he in heaven, Judah, or is he in hell? Because he still gave himself to the Lord, even though after he, shall we say, betrayed him with the kiss of Judah, what we say in Italian. When you kiss somebody, they're always like, Bacia di Judah, you're giving me the kiss of death here. But in that, he did ask for forgiveness afterwards because he knew he was wrong. He did return the money. Yeah. He went and hung himself. Now, is that a sinner who's going to heaven, or is that a person of God, it's going to heaven, or is that just a person who's just whoops, too late?
Well, what I can say is suicide is not the unpardonable sin. A lot of people think that suicide is the unpardonable sin. The reality is we're all sinners, and we all need grace, and we all need forgiveness, and there's no sin that's worse than another sin. So was Judas, did he go to heaven or not go to heaven? I honestly don't know, but what I can say is the suicide would not have sent him to hell. If he didn't go to heaven, it was because he didn't receive the grace and forgiveness of Jesus, but not because of what he did or did not do. So I think very likely he repented in his heart and responded to Christ, and the grief overwhelmed him because he was a human and he took his life as a result of it. But I believe that very likely he's in heaven today. But we don't know for fact. Like we won't know till we get there.
I know, right?
All I'm saying is there's nothing he did that gives him a go straight to jail, go straight to hell, whatever. And that's a misteaching in Christianity that suicide is the unpardonable sin. Suicide is horrible because what it is it's making a permanent decision based on a temporary feeling, and that feeling will pass. And it's a tragedy when people make a permanent decision based on a temporary feeling, but suicide does not send you to hell.
I was going to tell you to clear that up because there's a lot of people out there, and lately I've lost a couple more friends who people aren't saying how, but the assumption is there that it was suicide. And I've
Suicide,
had many friends
yeah,
that went through that. And I've also thought of that in my earlier days when I hit rock bottom. I mean, there's
yeah,
days we all feel like this would be better if we just ended it now. But there
yeah.
was always a fear. And there's an assumption that everybody that committed suicide will never get into heaven. And these poor families that had family members with severe mental health, where they saw nothing but black, they couldn't think straight, are being told that your child or your love went to hell because they killed themselves. And please explain to them that's not true.
100% not true. 100% not true. At the end of the day, there are a lot of people who can get tragically killed in a car right after they cussed at somebody or flipped somebody off. That doesn't send them to hell. It doesn't send them to hell. What sends people to hell is not receiving the forgiveness of Jesus. That's it. So I hear people say this all the time, like, why would a loving God send someone to hell? That's the wrong question. Why would a loving God force you to go to heaven? Love will not kidnap somebody against their will and make that person live with them. If you don't want to live for God, know God, be close to God, have a relationship with God, how could a loving God kidnap you and force you to live with him forever in heaven? That makes no sense. God gives you choice. You have free choice. In fact, to go to hell, you have to step over the body of Jesus to get there, because God did everything possible to prevent you from going to hell. Like, what
Len,
more could God
my
do
nephew
to
has hope
stop
then?
you?
My nephew has hope. He's
Everybody.
atheist. He's atheist, by the way.
Oh man. Well,
That's for another time, Pastor.
it's scientifically impossible to be an atheist. He may be an agnostic, but it's scientifically impossible to be an atheist.
That's a good conversation for another time,
We'll
because I
we'll
always
do that.
pick
We'll do
on
that
him.
next time, because I know we got to wrap up. I've got to.
Yeah, he's a wonderful, wonderful guy. But yes, he has a lot of questions. And I said, one time I got to get you with Pastor Aaron,
Dude,
and we got to.
let's talk. I've got a lot of atheist friends. I would love to talk.
Yeah, I would love for you to do that. And I think there's a lot of people out there that sometimes are in and out in traffic with God. They're weaving in and out because they're like, I want to get to him, but I don't
All
know.
I know is it takes a lot more faith to be an atheist than it does to be a Christian. It takes a lot more faith
I
to
said
be an
that to him.
atheist than to be a Christian. Yeah, I mean, it just does. I mean, it's like, there's just so little evidence for atheism versus Christianity that you just have to have a lot more faith to be an atheist than be a Christian.
Did it make sense when I said to him, you have to have faith to be an atheist, because even atheists have faith in not believing?
Oh, we all have faith. I mean, when you sit down in a chair, you have faith that the particles are going to hold you up. So,
in some chairs. But anyway, Pastor, we could probably go on forever, because we all still have questions, and people that think in some of these, please don't get turned off to church. It is nice to go once a week and learn the word of Christ, but it doesn't mean it makes you whole. I mean, there's a lot that goes with it as well. But some people think they don't need to go to church to be with God. It's just a nice place to get the word, but you can have church in your own house, right? Could you explain that one? Before we leave, I want people to understand what church really means. It's not that if you don't go, you're going to go to hell.
yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, the church is the bride of Christ, and Jesus loves his bride. And it would be very hard for you to have a relationship with me if you didn't like my wife. Like, if you hated my wife or didn't want anything to do with my wife, it would be hard for us to be close friends. But that doesn't have anything to do with heaven or hell. Heaven and hell has everything to do with salvation, grace. There's nothing you do to earn it. So going to church doesn't get you into heaven. Going to church does not get you into heaven. Grace gets you into heaven, period. Now, we should want to be a part of a church because it's the bride of Christ. And the bride's not perfect, and the bride's not going to be perfect, but it is his bride. And he loves his bride, and he wants you to be a part of his bride because he doesn't want you to do faith alone. So the issue of, will it send you to hell? Will it send you to heaven? That's a non-issue. It's what's best for you. What's best for you is that Jesus plants you in a community of people that love him, that serve him, that are not perfect. By the way, there'll be hypocrites. There'll be people that hurt you. There'll be people that make mistakes, but it's still his family. And he wants you to be a part of that family because it's how he designed us to live as believers.
Yeah. And I know for many years since I was kicked out of catechism, I didn't want to go to church and change my faith since then. But anyway, uh,
Well,
I'm enjoying going now and
let's do
listening.
this again.
Yes, let's do it again. I know you got some wonderful things to get done out there. We thank you for your time, your expertise, and your eye-opening conversations. Aaron, love you, brother. It's
Love
always a
you,
pleasure.
Giulio.
And everyone out there, thank you for tuning in. I know some of these conversations can go off the rail. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to send them to us at the email below. And next time we have Pastor Aaron on, maybe we can address some of those and tackle those questions or those thoughts or those opinions. Thank you very much and have a wonderful week. And God bless you, Aaron, and your family. And God bless all of you for being here.
Love you, Giulio. Can't wait to do this again.
Love you.